Boardroom Bound, Episode 15. Hello and welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry, and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give new and aspiring directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder, you can get all of today's show notes at podcast.gordon.edu. In today's episode, we'll be speaking with Peter Herschend. Peter has about 60-year career leading a close family enterprise. What that means is it's a private company, but it's a large one. It's got about 11,000 employees, lots of different divisions, really exciting business. And the best part is they run it as basically a for-profit company in the sense that it's as if it was a public company. They take all of those same best practices and apply them to the boardroom, and we'll unpack that today. So it's a small board, about 6 to 7 people for the most part. Only a couple of people from the family there. It's mostly external, outside, best practice directors. We're going to hear what it's like when Peter's going to pull back the curtain. What does it feel like to be in their board? How do they select their board directors? He's going to give you his personal view that the entire job, the singular focus, is about finding, securing, nurturing, selecting, feeding the CEO so the CEO can then help run the organization. So Peter's going to be very candid with us today and share all sorts of knowledge. We haven't talked on this show before about a closely held corporation, so it's a very exciting one. Let's jump into the show. So Peter Herschend, delighted to have you on Boardroom Bound today. Thanks for joining the show.
I am really pleased to be here, and thanks for the opportunity.
Well, the timing was perfect. You're here at Gordon College's campus for the Board of Trustees meeting. We just thought we'd add a little bit more to your day and bring you into the show before you disappeared.
Well, the Board of Trustees meeting is actually just halfway through. So we have broken. We broke for the evening. Whatever
Okay.
we did, we quit.
Okay.
And we'll start again in the morning. And we go all day tomorrow.
Well, maybe we'll talk about some of those best practices on the show today.
Okay.
One of the reasons I'm so excited to have you involved today is you're going to cover a different element that we've had thus far on the podcast. So just to give people a little bit of more background is that you and your brother co-founded the company, which has grown into this enormous enterprise with 11,000 employees, very successful private company. And we were sharing before we got on the air that in many ways you operate this private company with the best practices of a public company. Very curious as we talk through that today about how that relates to boards.
Well, that's factually you're quite correct. That was a decision my brother and I. My brother is my partner in this, and the ownership of the Herschend Enterprises is the name of the company. The ownership of the company is vested in our two families. Mm-hmm. Nowhere else. There's no public. You couldn't buy a share if you wanted it because it's
well, given how you've done, I wish I could have back in the beginning.
Back in 1960, we might have been happy with
Right.
the investment. But in any event, Jack and my brother, Jack and I made a decision back in 1960 and 61 that we did want to incorporate, and we did want to form an outside board and have it have the true functions of a real board of directors. And you know, the listener might say, well, what does that mean? You know, because sometimes you hear about boards of directors that are corrupt. They've been bought out, or
Unfortunately, that's what we hear about on the news.
Yeah. You hear about the exceptions, not the rule.
Mm-hmm.
But the exception is news, and a well-run board won't make the news. The board won't make the news,
Sure.
other than it's one single job. The most singularly important job of the board is the selection, care, and feeding and maintenance of the CEO. Jack and I, in 1961, is when we actually formulated our board, said we have to put membership on the board that are men and women who have been successful in the field of business. We didn't care what field they were in.
Okay.
It was immaterial. A lot of people say, well, if you're a potato chip company, you ought to have people who
Within
on the
your
board who
industry.
know potato chips.
Yeah.
I don't believe that at all.
Okay. Because you wanted a diverse view.
I'm more interested in business acumen. I'm more interested in, well, here's a good example. In 1962, one of our board members, a gentleman by the name of George Schelling, he was at the time in the high-tech plumbing business. In other words, he wasn't selling you toilets. He was selling you piping that, and this is an actual case, that DuPont could use. He was down in Wilmington, Delaware, was his operation. And he had a contract with DuPont that said, I will always have what you need. And an order came in from DuPont it wasn't a big order. It was for one piece of pipe, maybe 24 inches long, but it was very, very high pressure. It could handle 3,000 pounds of steam pressure, something like that. And they went to the bin where it was supposed to be, and it wasn't there. And George said, find it somewhere in the United States and get it here. They found it in Los Angeles. He was in Wilmington, Delaware. And they chartered a jet with one pilot and a piece of pipe sitting in the co-pilot seat. And they had it there the next morning. They never told DuPont.
Sure.
The lesson we learned from that was customer service. You don't take customer service for granted. You see to it that the needs of the customer are met. It was an immense piece of input that our board gave to. Remember, Jack, my brother, and I were the senior operating guys at the time. He was president, and I was by title executive VP. That wasn't so much a matter of he won the coin toss. It was just the way we worked together.
I assumed it was alphabetical based on your names.
Well, it could have been. I could have done the job. He was. Jack is a very detail-oriented guy and good with numbers. Mm-hmm. And his was the operating side of the company. Remember, we're in a business which is hosting now. If he was still doing it, we're hosting at, our various properties, over 11 million visitors. But it's when they come through the gate, from the front gate on, was his job. Okay. My job was the marketing side.
Okay.
My job was to get them there. And we were a good team then and now.
And of course, the board was guiding both of you in both of those roles.
That's right. The board, in that case, it was because we were I think your listeners would probably know what a closely held corporation is.
Right.
We were and are a closely held corporation. So he and I worked together very, very well. It was an unusual partnership. Most of the listeners to this podcast would not really want to consider a 30-year partnership with their brother or their sister.
That's what's so impressive to me.
In business. That's not the norm, and I know that. But Jack and I were able to overcome that, and I've said it before, he's my partner and my best friend today. So coming back to the board, in 61, we said we've got to find the right mix of men and women. A small board, 6 people.
That's very small.
Yep.
For such a big business.
6, 7. We've gone as high as 9. We kind of prefer 7. Of that board, one of the rules, governance, that we wrote down then and now, was very simply that there would never be more than 2 family members on the board at any one time.
It's a big decision for a closely held business.
But it was purposeful because what we want from the board isn't support of the family. Mm-hmm. What we want from the board is their wisdom. And when I look for the qualifications of a board member, I want a strategic thinker. Mm-hmm. I want somebody who has leadership experience in. They can have had unsuccessful leadership, but they cannot be unsuccessful themselves. They have to be with a corporation or have had a series of companies they were with where they
Experience to
were
draw upon.
successful
Right.
themselves. On our present board, we have nobody who is in our industry, that is the theme park industry.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody. We have a publisher. We have two investment bankers. One entrepreneur who sold it to DuPont, as a matter of fact, a industrial fertilizer company. What does that have to do with our type of business? The answer is not a thing.
I would actually jump in there and say, I think that's potentially thinking about things the wrong way for our audience. Going, industry fit could be one part of it, but the other skill sets you might be strategy, you might be a change agent, you might be a financial expert.
Absolutely.
So it could be in different ways. I think that's what you're getting to, right, Peter?
One of the there's no question. The finance, the investment bankers, for example, in general, you don't want your banker, you don't want your own banker on your board.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? Because sometimes you're not doing things illegally, but it may look like it would be impacting your credit. Your banker, this guy is sitting there, and he's going to okay your loan. You
Right.
don't want to go into that.
Right.
You also don't want your lawyer on your board. You need a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
but the lawyer is going to tell you what you can't do.
Right.
And sometimes that's very important. We have corporately we have a lawyer, and but he doesn't sit on the board. The board, a good board, our board, essentially is policy. Policy on personnel.
Mm-hmm.
Policy on finance.
Mm-hmm.
Policy on growth. Where and how are you going to grow? It is not the board that innovates where we go. A few years ago, 5 to be exact, management brought to the board the idea of purchasing the Harlem Globetrotters.
Which evokes memories of me as a child of going to the experience. So
You
much
got it.
fun.
You got it. They're still out there. Biggest year they ever had was last year until this year, and they're gonna have a big measuring audience
Okay.
in their career. But the management brought to the board this idea, and it took 2 board meetings. We meet 4 times a year.
Mm-hmm.
Took 2 board meetings for the board to see it as a fit inside the portfolio of the company.
Okay.
You would say, "Oh, that's a natural." You know, when you look
you're in
at
the
Dollywood, you
entertainment
look at
business,
Silver Dollar City, and well, you know, here we sit. The Ducks that are down in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of our companies.
Oh.
We've since sold it, but that was a Herschend Enterprise operating company.
Okay.
So again, you see the entertainment theme.
Sure.
By the way, the Ducks operation in Boston is a class act. The lady who runs that is just sharp. She's the sharpest knife in the drawer by far, and really is doing a very, very, very good job. But the board, coming back to the Harlem Globetrotters, the board approved that and said that's a fit. We formed what they wanted us to do, and we did, was form an operating division for that. A couple years before that, management came to the board and said, we would like to have an entertainment division for television. And they brought in an idea of what they could do, and again, making a long story short, board said, yeah, that can fit. That'll work. And so now we have, if you have any kids at home, and they watch TV on Saturday morning, I'll bet you they would know the name Splash and Bubbles,
Okay.
the two fish who are on public television. That's our company. We have another one. We're just I can't even tell you about it. We're just launching.
When you're back next time, you can tell us about it.
Next board meeting, I can tell you about it. So that's another division of the company. The board said to management, "Look, you're getting a lot of different operating properties out here. We have the parks division, the live entertainment division that's housing the Globetrotters, a TV division. I can't remember the name of it, but it's where our TV offerings are running now. We just purchased, and again, the board approves this. Management doesn't do it without.
So you're taking great ideas off the board that you've vetted internally for them to give a strategic viewpoint and feedback, and
That's
is it a
their
blessing
job.
or is it guidance, or how would you describe it?
Well, they have to approve it. They have to put by vote, their stamp of approval. They do that two ways. One, if it's the TV, we'll just talk about them. That's a new division, and it wasn't in the budget.
Okay.
So they had to approve the allocation of reserve funds for the acquisition and operation of that division. That's a true, because we're outside of budget. Board, our governance says you will approve deviations from the budget.
Makes sense.
Then the board will at the next budgeting cycle, which we just went through, will approve the individual, not the line items for light bulbs.
I would hope not.
Yeah, they do not. But they will approve the overall budget technically for the whole corporation, but they always break it back into the divisions and look at the EBITDA of each of the divisions. Does everybody know what EBITDA is?
Basically, how you're doing is a easy way to break it down for some of our listeners, perhaps.
Yeah, it's really the true profit of the company.
Right.
It's not what you report to the
Without the accounting shenanigans, perhaps.
Yeah, that's right. It's all of the financial profit of the company without
one-time charges,
resources for depreciation and allowances for things wearing. It's a much more accurate number.
Yeah.
But they will look very closely at EBITDA for each of the divisions, and in a historic perspective. How are we doing against what we said we would do? Management, you said you would be at this level, and you didn't make it.
Right.
What's going on? Why is that? Management has to answer to that. And we have a couple of properties in our operating portfolio that are not performing well. And they're now the board has flagged them. So you owe us closer accounting for those. That's the function of a board.
Sure.
Remembering always, the board represents ownership. Ownership is diverse, and in our case, it is 60 family members. And you absolutely don't want 60 family members asking management questions. That would be
Wouldn't get anything done.
a disaster. It'd be a disaster because 60 family members, with maybe 3 or 4 exceptions, are not trained business people. Are they aware of what the company does? Of course they are, because they get the reports and they attend the meetings and all of that. But the reason I mentioned a little while ago, only 2 people on the board, two
Family members
on the board at any one time. I can't think of a worse way to operate than would be to have my mother, my uncle, our lawyer, and 2 bankers on our board, and having them think strategically.
Well, now, just to be honest, I think there are nonprofits sometimes that are run like that. Someone sets up let's say a professional athlete sets up their pet charity and they have a
Yep.
board and they stack it with their people and they probably pay them a good salary. And I think we can agree that's generally not a good way to go.
I think that there is a great misconception with the word not-for-profit corporation.
Mm-hmm.
The not-for-profit deals with the tax structure, income taxes that you don't pay.
Right.
That's all that it deals with. If you operate with quote marks around it, a not-for-profit on the basis that it isn't going to make money, you have a very short life.
That's a true charity. You're going to be begging for dollars.
You're going to die.
Yeah.
Call me because I want to go to your funeral. You're not going to live. You have to. Not-for-profit has to have a profit. They just don't call it that. That's okay. That's just an accounting term as far as I'm concerned. Mm. But if you run a not-for-profit, you have to have more income than you have expenses, or you won't be here tomorrow.
Now, in fairness, I've worked for a business that was a for-profit that was more like a non-profit. This was in the dot-com days, and we didn't make any money, and that was the theory. This was the new age and the way it was going to go. So I'm with you. All companies should be focusing on the bottom line.
Yeah, on EBITDA, not just on the bottom line,
Right.
but on EBITDA. And you take EBITDA is how you value a company. Mm-hmm. It's you don't take it on its profit line, you take it on its EBITDA line. And it's times EBITDA is what the company is worth. Sometimes 6 to 8 times, and then people we just bid on a business and we didn't get it because the people who bought it paid 12 times EBITDA. I will tell you that business will be on the market again in the next 3 to 4 years.
I was going to say, I'd rather lose out on an opportunity than overpay for it.
Oh, yeah. Why would you, unless it's an ego thing, unless you just, and then you better have a way to make up that difference somewhere else. Sure. Within the company. But the board, if now we're in the profit side of things, but it applies to Gordon College, by the way. Mm-hmm. Gordon College is a not-for-profit organization. It doggone well better have more income than it has outflow.
Sure. All organizations, as we've said before, need to focus on that principle.
It's going to have a terrible time for 1 year, perhaps, but you still have to have the reserves to carry you through.
Right.
So, seeing to it that the strategy, the pronounced strategies of the company are followed. Mm-hmm. The board does that. Our board absolutely will call to management and say, we want to know where the park division, how the park division is doing, and in some detail.
Sure.
Again, not to criticize
they need to understand in order to give feedback.
But to get a sense of what are they doing, how are you going to grow your business? Not this year. Very, very so. Our corporate board gets an interim report, but it takes mm-hmm. about 5 minutes on where we are this year. We'll spend much more time reading the financials from how the company did last year. And I always think, more importantly, the board will review. I'm, again, speaking for our company, kind of depending on which part of it you're talking about, but we project 3 to 5 years out.
Which is smart.
Where we're going to be. Is it accurate? And are you holding people's feet to the fire on the dollar figure of expenses 3 years from now? The answer is, of course not. But you are thinking carefully about where are you going to be? What is your corporate EBITDA going to be? And the answer to that is it's the sum of the parts. Mm-hmm. So last year we acquired, mid-year, we acquired a brand new business. And we'd been working with them for 2 years. They finally said yes, and brought them in. And now that impacted the EBITDA a little bit this year, not much. But next year it'll have a major effect on the EBITDA.
Well, Peter, I would love to get your take on this, that we've spoken on this show previously many times about how someone is selected to be a board member of a nonprofit. We've talked about for-profit public companies. We haven't yet talked about it for a privately held company. And I'm sure you're going to tell me it's very similar to some of the others, but I would love to tease this out with you. So some of our listeners are thinking, this sounds like the kind of thing that I would like to do. Can you talk us through your process of, you were vice chair of the board. How do you go about finding and selecting your board members?
It hasn't changed much in our 58 years of business.
Must be doing something right then.
But now I'm going to tell you, I don't care whether you're talking profit or not for profit. The criteria, in my judgment, remains the same. Your passion, you as a board member candidate, maybe you have a passion for the work of, let's just make up the Red Cross.
Sure.
Not for profit. But, you want to go there. Absolutely wonderful. Don't come to me and talk to me about the Red Cross, because that's not my passion.
Right.
So I want a board member. Remember, I'm talking either side of the street now. I want a board member who has a passion for what we do as a corporation. Not-for-profit corporations are corporations. For-profit corporations are corporations. So what we do has a passion, an interest in. I like that. You guys has a passion for the company. A couple of our newer board members, we been talking to for quite some time, but they are very, very impressed with the work that we do, the results that we get in the company. So that's passion. Right. I want to be there. 2, they have to be demonstrated strategic thinkers. I don't care at all about their operational how good they are at operating something short term.
Right.
I want them to be strategic thinkers, so that they can look out 5. I don't ask much past 5 years. Sometimes we talk 10 years. But nobody's feet get held to the fire 10 years out.
Hard to predict that far out.
Yeah. Well, it's an exercise in futility, because the facts, the world changes so much. It has turned so many times. So I want passion. I want strategic thinking. I want a person who is smart. And I do not mean necessarily college PhD. We don't have a highest degree we have. We have 3 or 4 master's degrees on our board. But that's not the smart I'm talking about. I want somebody who is smart in how things really, really work. What really makes good sense. I will tell you, you asked about our company. I will tell you, I would prefer, but it's not a requirement, that they be a Christian. We are a Christian company.
Cultural fit.
Cultural fit. They've got to be there. And then they have to be a person who has the time to do exactly what we're talking about. We meet 4 times a year. Now they're one day meetings usually, but you got to get there and you got to get home. And we meet all around the country. We meet really wherever we are thinking about going or are in fact going. Next week after next, have a board meeting in Denver, Colorado. I am not on the board. I guess that ought to be made clear. My brother and I both stepped off the board intentionally about 12 years ago.
Okay.
Some have said, well, you guys own the company. Well, we own part of the company. We don't own it outright. But why did you step off the board? And that answer has to do with our family. We have an objective inside. It's just our family. I'm not saying this goes on with every board out there. I wish it did, but in our case, we want to stay family held, closely held forever. And if Jack and I were still sitting on the board in senior operating positions, I'm 84. My brother's 86. Guess what? I'm going to die one day. I'm going to go home to the Lord.
We all are, yeah.
It's perfectly okay. Perfectly okay. But if you do that while you're sitting at your desk, you haven't done the job of perpetuating the company you want to perpetuate.
Succession planning.
So we made the decision 15 years ago that the board should hire its first CEO, outside CEO. That's how we refer to it. And we did that. We went through a learning curve. How did we do right? Well, the first two CEOs we hired were, okay, they're still very good friends, and we do business with one of them. But we went through the board went through a learning curve of what they were looking for. Remember, I said earlier, this is the most important function. It's more important than strategic planning. Hiring, caring for, feeding, evaluating the CEO.
Surely, and it starts if you pick the wrong person, nothing else is going to be the right fit after that.
You put the wrong captain on a ship in the Navy. I got a great book in my library. It's called The Best Damn Ship in the Navy. And it's out there. You can go read it. But it is a story of leadership. It's not a story about the Navy. It's a story about leadership, where they had a captain, brand new ship. And it immediately went to the bottom of the evaluation heap.
Okay.
It's awful. Navy realized we got a problem here, and it's called the captain. They changed captains and put a guy who was people-centered. Did he know how to run a ship? Of course he did. That's engineering. But he was people-centered. He paid attention to his people. And within 18 months, that same ship went to the top of the ratings. It's all about the right CEO.
There's no question that the hiring in general is essential. And what we've talked about today was hiring the right board members as well in many respects, because they're giving you the feedback and the guidance and helping you pick. So it actually all works together perfectly.
We've done various to hire. And by the word, you use the right word. We pay our board members, and because we expect them to be efficient and contributing, and to do their homework. And how much we pay them is proprietary, but it's significant. They won't make it a profession. Right. We don't have any of them who are professional board members. How do we find them? We have used search firms who specialize in board members. But we go to them with that same criteria. I just rattled off 4 or 5 points. We go, here's what we're looking for. Help us. Yeah. We have hired, brought on. Hired's really the wrong word, but we brought onto our board 2, 3 in the last 10 years. 3, 4, maybe 4. Yeah, probably 4. Individuals onto our board that we found through board search firms.
Okay.
Who specialize in that. That's what they do. The individual they find is they bring the person in, rather obviously, and he or she goes through a series of interviews, but they are not just glad to meet you and what's your favorite food.
A little more rigorous than that.
They're under the looking glass. It isn't in a board setting. We don't do that. We don't put them all one person in front of the board. Just don't happen to think that is good practice. And then we bring them into a board meeting with voice but no vote.
Mm-hmm.
And they participate for a meeting, and that's a very hard meeting for the individual, because even though she may well have studied the company well, there's an awful lot of material that comes through a given board meeting.
Sure.
In terms of the decisions they're going to be making. But it is important what they bring to the table. And the board will meet. Then the board votes on the people they want to bring in. They then turn around and come back to the stockholders.
Interesting.
A board vote won't get you on the board. It's the stockholders, the family, who goes through the same process. Is it all the family, all 60 of the family, wives and husbands who don't know anything, interviewing? The answer is, of course not. There's a half a dozen people in the family who are very active in the business, not at the board level, but they have senior parts of the business. And they interview too. And they make a recommendation to the family. I said we had a meeting coming up in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
Right before the board meeting, we have a family meeting. We meet twice a year, formal meeting, twice a year. This is the winter meeting, rather obviously. And why they picked Denver, I have no idea. It doesn't seem to make any sense to me.
Perhaps.
It's not warm and sunny, I know that. But there we are. And the individual will be brought up for a vote. The rest of the board, the sitting board, is voted on every second year. Half the board at a time.
Okay.
And 2 years ago, this being the third year we set up a plan that 3 of the long-term board members, 20-year board members, would go off. And they are. This is the former chairman of the board. This is his last year as a board member. He is not. He isn't even sitting as chair now, because the board elected internally elected a new chair.
Well, Peter, this has been a fascinating behind-the-scenes peek at your closely held company and how it's run, and I love the best practices you're bringing across. We've had a very clear discussion about nonprofit, for-profit. There's lots of common elements to do, and you bring many of the public company best practices to your firm. It's clear to see why, in many ways, that's helped you prosper over the years. And thank you for being willing to pull back the curtain for us today on the Boardroom Bound podcast.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity. And what I really hope is that folks who are listening today will find not 1,000 things. They can just have heard one thing that they can apply to their personal and then professional life, whether they're on the board or in management. Then we've done a good job if there's just one nugget they walk away with.
Well, I can tell you personally, I've taken more than one nugget away, so I've benefited from many of our listeners. So, Peter, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
And that's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. I really enjoyed chatting with Peter Herschend. I loved how he gave his clear, transparent, vulnerable, honest impressions of what a board should do, how it should function. For example, he told us he's got very clear requirements for a board member. He thinks they should be the same at any organization. Number 1, find out what you're passionate about and do that, because it's going to shine through. Make sure you're a strategic thinker, someone who can look several years ahead. Be smart, not necessarily intellectual, a bit of more street smarts and how you can apply that. Obviously, be a cultural fit for the organization and ensure you've got the time that you can commit to be successful. So if you'd like to hear more about this, see some of the resources and understand great ways to connect, head over to podcast.gordon.edu. And finally today, I'd encourage you to spend just 30 seconds to leave us a written review on iTunes. That is really the best way that we can get word out about this show. So thanks for joining me on this episode of the show. I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to be Boardroom Bound.